Welcome to Overtime here on WOTM. I am Gerhard Mathangani, joined by our expert researcher slash historian. He's got a lot of great information as it relates to the college football championship. Of course, it is Alabama and Georgia. Mark Everett Kelly. Mark, this is our final show before that big game. So one of the things I really want to get nuanced in was some of the detailed things, not only about this game, but then some of your keys going into that championship game and some of the things to look for on Monday night. One of the things you did really a good job of is helping it break down by the numbers and some pieces of trivia that you could tell your friends about as we kind of break this thing down. Of course, people down in the South, football fans of the SEC, know these two programs and have known probably for the better part of the year that Alabama and Georgia were number one and number two, but it kind of goes a lot deeper as far as just how much these two are intrinsically tied.
Well, you know that basically Georgia has one hole to get out of, and that's if they don't beat Alabama, then everything they've done, almost as a program, just doesn't mean anything. I mean, you see that SEC Shorts thing where him and Hope have an argument. I mean, it's hysterical.
Right.
But that's really what it's been for Georgia because they've been great. They've won their division, even going back to Mark Richt.
Right.
They've been in the SEC championship game. They've been one of the best teams in the SEC, but they've never been able to win a national championship. They've, they haven't really even consistently won an SEC championship.
Right.
So I think those two things, they want to have that legacy that Alabama's developed under Saban. And I think with Kirby Smart, you have a very good head coach, but there's just one big barrier in the way, and it's Nick Saban and Alabama.
Yep.
And it's not just that they lose, it's that they lose in very disheartening ways where they blow leads. You've seen in 3 of the last 4 games, they've had double-digit leads. They've had halftime leads in a couple of them. And, Alabama outscoring them in the second half and seemingly always making big plays when they have to is what Georgia fans are worried about. But for the first time, Georgia finally has a ticked-off factor where, like we had talked about, either they're going to show up and really play a great game because so much is on the line, or the very first thing that happens that goes wrong, they're just kind of cave in and collapse. But what I want to do is have a little bit of fun with some of the numbers. So we decided to do a by the numbers national championship preview. So we're going to start with number 1 here. That's the number of Saban assistants who have defeated him in 26 games. 25-1, but it just happened to be the second to last game. With Jimbo Fisher, who beat him. And there's another interesting thing that we're going to discover too with Kirby Smart and his number of games that he's playing against Nick Saban here a little bit further down. Number 2 is the second time Alabama and Georgia are meeting for a national championship. That's kind of obvious. 3 is the third time the national championship is an all-SEC matchup. Because they are playing, we had Alabama against LSU in 2011, which was a rematch of a regular season. Then we had Georgia against Alabama in 2017. Now, again, when you go over a national championship year, you take the regular season year. Because people are like, well, that game was in January of 2018. But it's always considered the regular season year when you're talking about the national championship. So just like this year is the 2021 national championship, even though Alabama beat Ohio State in January of 2021 last year. So number 4 is this is the 4th time a national championship features a rematch of another year. Now, that might be a little bit of confusing with the wording, but Georgia and Alabama are playing for a second time in a national championship. There are 3 other times that it's happened.
And we'll get to those. We'll have those.
We will get to those. And then as we move down, we look at number 5 and 6. The 5th time that Kirby Smart faces Saban. This is the stat that we talked about. Tying Jimbo Fisher for the most meetings of former assistants. Now, if you want to look at that a little eerie and be like, well, when Jimbo Fisher played him the fifth time, he beat him. So, maybe this is kind of eerily.
The omen.
That way
the omen
for Kirby Smart. Number 6, Alabama has defeated 6 different opponents in their national championships under Saban. Georgia would be the first time that they would be repeating that. Then number 24 is the number of Georgia first half point differential in the last 4 games against Alabama. They have outscored by 24 points. And here's another big number that is going to get even bigger in another stat. Alabama's won 34 consecutive games against SEC East opponents.
Wow. That's insane. And you take a look at just what that means for the Crimson Tide as they meet back up in this matchup. There's so many matchups that favor Alabama. You go through longevity. There's so many smaller ones that really favor Georgia in a way where you're like, hey, well, this, like you said, this is once again time number 5 for Kirby Smart. Jimbo Fisher got him time number 5. Is that maybe a magic number when you finally kind of beat the Jedi Master, so to speak? So we'll see. And then moving on here, we'll have the number 41, the number plus 58, and a little over 4,112 days.
Now, everybody talks about Georgia's defense, but in the last 2 games against Alabama, Georgia's allowed 41 points, lost 41-24 in both of those games by 17 points. Plus 58 is the number of second half, the point differential in the second half in the last 4 games between these 2 teams. That's why Alabama kind of has that mental edge over Georgia, because when it comes time to make the plays, and at the times that the plays needed to be made, Alabama makes them, and Georgia's kind of left wondering what they could have done better. Then the final number here is 4,112. This the number of days since Alabama last lost to an SEC opponent. That is October 9th, 2010, against Philip Garcia.
South Carolina.
Rashawn Lattimore in South Carolina. And one of the best games, the only time South Carolina ever beat a number 1 team. And then the next week, South Carolina goes out and blows a 28-7 lead to Kentucky. So, I mean, it just so happens that it was a really weird run year. One of the only years a 3-loss team won the East in South Carolina. That was the last time Alabama lost to a team, really a team they probably should have beat. When you consider South Carolina has only won 1 Eastern Division title, and it's not like they're a Georgia or a Florida. But Alabama's been able to beat them. Anybody that's risen up in the East since then, Alabama's been able to take advantage of and beat them, including going undefeated in the SEC championship games they played in.
Exactly. And we'll also take a look at the championship game rematches. Is one thing you touched on in your by the numbers, but we really wanted to break it down just in case people didn't know. I think a lot of people maybe have thought the Alabama-Clemson matchups, because we've now seen that a couple of times, and of course, second time for the Bama-Georgia matchup. But then Bama's in another one, and so is Miami.
Well, Miami of Florida was a powerhouse for a long time when they had Jimmy Johnson and they had Craig Erickson. For so long, Miami was the building block for college football. They played 3 times against Nebraska in national championship games: 1991, 1994, and 2001. Miami went 2-1 in those games. Clemson against Alabama, the great 2015, 2016 back-to-back years that came down to the final minutes. Clemson 1-1, Alabama 1-1, and then Clemson was able to beat Alabama in 2018. Really gave Saban a beating that no one else has been able to give him. I mean, I thought that was one of the times that Saban really looked aggravated and didn't have answers in that game. Trevor Lawrence, the Clemson defense played great. Miami and Alabama on here again. They played 1989 and 1992, going 1-1. They split those 2 matchups. Georgia and Alabama, this is the second time they're meeting. Alabama won the first one, and who's going to win the second one? But in all of these, in the Miami-Nebraska, the team that won the first game lost the second game. Same thing with Clemson and Alabama. You had Alabama winning the first game and Clemson winning the second game. In Miami and Alabama lost in 1989, wound up winning in 1992, which was an absolute bloodletting. They destroyed Miami that game. And then, obviously, Alabama beat Georgia a couple years ago. Now, that game a couple years ago was legendary.
For sure.
I mean, it born Devonta Smith, it born Tua. And I think that was the first time that really Alabama's offense stood out and be like that. And that was a major change in the program, because it was always built on a run game and strong defense. And then they kind of evolved into a dynamic offense.
Dynamic passing offense as well. And we'll hear from Bill O'Brien, the Alabama offensive coordinator, in just a bit. Now let's fast forward to this week's game. Of course, Alabama on the practice field. This is footage from today down in Tuscaloosa. As we look at this matchup, since this is our final show between now and that national championship game, what are some of the things that you're looking forward to? And finish this sentence: Alabama will win if, Georgia will win if.
Georgia will win if Stetson Bennett plays like Bryce Young.
Bryce Young.
I don't see that happening, because Stetson Bennett is limited in what he can do. We talked about this last time. Bryce Young has the ability to create off of plays that aren't going his way. Broken play factor is huge.
Right.
And Stetson Bennett can't do that. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be able to do that in order to win. But if you don't do that, you need to be flawless on everything else.
Right.
And Stetson Bennett has been flawless against other teams in college football, but he's made consistent mistakes against Alabama. And Alabama's defense is starting to come into their own.
For sure.
Will Anderson, Dallas Turner, these are guys that will come after and get after you. Mathis is another guy that's really coming of age, and they're putting a lot of pressure on the quarterback. There's a lot of tackles for loss that they're going to get in the last couple games that they've gotten and that they will get against Georgia, because these guys are playing with a mission now. Took them a while to get used to each other, and I think their defense took a lot of heat because they would play well, but there would always be a mental fart in one or two plays a game. They've corrected that. They've been really solid these last couple of games, and holding Cincinnati at only 218 yards, a pretty good offense. So that's the other thing that's going to go for Alabama in this game, that maybe they didn't have that going for them when they played Georgia the first time. If their defense can be just as dominant as Georgia's, and it's coming of age. Next year, I don't even want to think about how good this team is going to be. But this could be that first game, kind of like when you saw Mac Jones and them beating Michigan after they lost to Auburn in 2019. That was kind of a rebirth of what they could be next year. This could be that game for them. Georgia will win the game if they can get over that mental problem that they have with seeing Alabama, with playing with a lead, with making big plays at big times to put their foot on the throat of Alabama. They can get a lead, but they have to then cause turnovers. They got to do something that knocks Alabama back and really gets their attention. Alabama's done that, and that Jameson Williams play did that in that first meeting. The Waddle play and that game down in Alabama did that in that game. Jalen Hurts coming in and taking over in the SEC championship game back in 2018 did that then. So there's always been a time they did that. Then when Tua came in the SEC championship game in 2017, that happened. Georgia hasn't had an answer like that. It's like if Stetson Bennett gets hurt and they bring in a backup quarterback that comes in and wins the game, that would be an example of doing that. But who knows if that can happen.
Exactly.
Alabama has those players. They have playmakers. Georgia on offense needs to develop and find a playmaker that can equal the playmakers that Alabama has. I don't know if they can do that. We know they have it on defense, and Alabama can match them on defense as far as playmakers. I don't think Georgia can match them on offense. That, to me, is going to be the deciding factor in that game.
Exactly. I think Bama's a little bit banged up. I think we'll see the Georgia team in this game. We'll see more of the Georgia that we saw all year long in this one, the defense I'm talking about, than the one that we saw in Atlanta about a month ago. Here's Bill O'Brien, the offensive coordinator for Alabama, scheming up against that Georgia defense, and, of course, Coach Muschamp, Coach Smart, and Coach Lanning over with the Bulldogs.
You have to do a little bit of both. You have to go back to the drawing board, so to speak. You got to start from scratch. You have to look at the last game. You got to go back and review the whole season, your season, their season. It's a long week. They have a great defense, almost like a generational defense. They have amazing stats, and they play hard, they play good. They got a lot of great players, great coaches on that side of the ball, and so it's going to be a challenge for us.
The national championship game is on Monday. Well, coming up next here in Overtime, we'll talk a little college basketball, right in the full swing of things. Dipped our toe a little bit. Auburn picked up a big win. We'll discuss coming up next.